We are finally at the halfway point to House of Lay Dragoon Season 3, and it's been an interesting ride, and I'll be very honest with you, I've been entertained. Now, I know this is the internet, and a lot of the internet lacks nuance in any conversation. This is either a 10 out of 10, or it's the worst thing since pineapple on pizza, and no in between. But as always, on this channel, we reject that. The purpose of any television show or movie is to entertain, and so far, I think Season 3 has done that. And frankly, some of its faults are not entirely on the writers, but on HBO. But some of it you can definitely blame on the writers, and we'll talk about that. But before we get into it, please be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, favorite, all that jazz. You know the drill. And before you ask about the thumbnail, I'm afraid I can't explain that to you because of the implication. But let's get into it. Real quick, let me do a short review to episode 4 to get it all in perspective. So, what did I think of episode 4? It was fine. It wasn't bad, nor was it on the level of the previous 3, but it was a necessary one to really set us up for the rest of the season. And because I was able to watch the episode 5 screener, episode 4 had to happen for episode 5 to cook. And cook it does, my friends. You'll see what I mean in a couple of days, when 5 officially comes out. Had season 3 had its original 8, even 10 episodes, maybe all of the stuffing we got in 4 would have been spread out a bit, but some of it did feel like they were overstuffing the episode with its setup. But honestly, I don't mind an episode like this every now and then to get it all out of the way. If anything, I feel bad for the writers that they won't be able to play with the Ormund character some more, because he doesn't really start to come into play until this episode, and I feel like he needed more time to cook. But, at the same time, this episode, I think, gave us enough of him to set him up as the new villain of the series, a golden god, if you will. But I will say, this one is interesting because it kind of reminded me of old school Game of Thrones, and in a way it scratched that grand scale fantasy itch, where we got to go to multiple locations where several characters are scheming and plotting and planning. It's definitely not your traditional Hot D episode where everyone is in one location arguing to be the worst person in the room. Now everyone is arguing to be the worst person in 5 different locations. It's definitely a step up. And again, based off what I've seen, this episode needed to be what it was. It needed to walk so episode 5 could run, and then episode 6 could ascend into the sky like a champion of the sun, if you will. As for these first 4, it feels weird because of course they chose to finish out season 2, and now season 3 technically gets 6 episodes, but as we've seen with Night of the Seven, 6 isn't that bad. This isn't like adapting a full novel like in Game of Thrones. A lot of Fire and Blood is written where a whole host of pages can fit into one episode, while one paragraph can be half of another, like with season 1 episode 8. I put this mostly on HBO for messing with the order of things. I've discussed the timeline to Season 2's issues in a separate video, but for the most part, it's on HBO to support its flagship television show the best it can, and it failed in that. The writing team did its best to make sure this season packed a punch, and so far it has, but it also missed a mark here and there that HBO has nothing to do with. One example is the first half of the first episode. It felt pointless at times, to retread familiar ground that it didn't really need to. I firmly believe episodes 1 and 2 could have been combined to save on some time, but somewhere along the way the writers felt as if the premiere didn't need to be a premiere, but a hybrid of 2 different types of episodes. Again, I enjoyed those first 2, but I would have enjoyed it more if the writers adapted to the curveball thrown at them by HBO, instead of trying to finish out last season in a new season, which then disrupts the pacing of this current season. Then we come to episode 3, which I thought was a great episode, and so far the best one. It's an Ice and Fire chapter come to life. For those of you who don't know or haven't read the Game of Thrones books, each chapter is a point of view for a different character, and that is exactly what they did in 3 with Rhaenyra. Not only do we see things from her point of view, but we also see how trying to run a kingdom has its issues. I love that. Though I wish we got the point of view of another character to see exactly how Rhaenyra's actions look to someone on the outside. Maybe episode 4 could have focused on Daemon's perspective, but after watching episode 5, I think they should have done something similar with him for that one, and it would have worked out quite well, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Overall, I think Season 3, so far, has been pretty good, but then again, Season 2, by this point, was also pretty good, and now people look back on it as the bad one, even though half of the episodes everybody enjoyed. I would know, I was there. It really comes down to how it all ends, and if they can stick the landing better than last time, sure. But for this season, for these first 4, I think they did a pretty fine job of keeping us entertained. But of course, I asked you guys what you thought of the season so far, and I've gone through my comment section, so allow me to highlight what the audience thinks of the season. Starting with this one here. On Twitter, Targaryen Loyalist, shout out to them, says, I'm really enjoying my time with House of the Dragon. Season 3 feels far more confident than Season 2. I'd even say it has recaptured the confidence of Season 1. I also love that we finally have an unapologetically evil character in Ormund, something I think this show has been missing since the beginning. It's not perfect by any means, but it's been a very enjoyable ride so far. I agree completely, especially about Ormund. He feels like an actual adult villain and not a Final Fantasy edgelord that Aemon was. Most of our villain characters aren't really villains, just douchebags who make bad decisions. But Ormund is out here just being a crazy asshole. Maybe not on the level of Ramsay or Walder Frey, but he's up there. Personally, I'm enjoying him being Dennis from Always Sunny, and I think that has worked out in his favor and in the show's favor, so we'll see what other memes we could come up with here. Also on Twitter, Ricardo says, "It's been mostly good so far, but I'm just worried about those butterflies we were warned about. I feel like they are gonna whip out some crazy shit in this other half." It's possible, it is. For those of you who may have forgotten, George's Toxic Butterflies blog post believed that the writers were missing their mark by changing certain things, and I'm gonna be very real with you, brother. I love George. I love the series he's created that we can all come together and talk about and share. George is awesome, but George's dislike of something will never color my enjoyment of it. It's possible that whatever he warned us about could happen, and it would be fine. Or maybe they changed it. Who knows? We don't know because the example he gave in his blog post is apparently just one of many issues he had, and never went into detail on the other stuff. That said, don't let his warning here mess with your enjoyment of something. Again, I love the man and what he's done for the genre, but no one person, regardless if it's George, me, anybody, should impact how you or anyone else enjoys something. Be unapologetic about it. Based off what Christopher Tolkien said, it's possible his father would have hated Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Does that stop me from binging the fuck out of the extended edition at least once a year? Hell no. That is the golden trilogy, and I will fight to defend it all day, every day. And frankly, George could be right there with us, blogging about his enjoyment or dislike of the current season, but he'd rather let his assistants promote merchandise on there, so who knows what he really thinks. Over on YouTube, Damian May says, "I'm finding it entertaining, even as a book reader. I'm not sure that a perfect adaptation of Fire and Blood would be possible or desirable, so I'm enjoying seeing the changes they make and then being able to discuss why they might have made the choices they did. There are plenty of things that are dumb or don't make sense, but for me, that's just creating more discussion, which is fun." You know, Damian, that's a very good attitude to have about anything, and I wish more people were like that. But I do agree with you on how it's likely not possible to do a full, faithful adaptation of Fire and Blood, especially since George wrote it like a history book that is up to interpretation. I know he complains that people change his stuff around, and that is some genuine criticism, there it is. But also, maybe he should have set some of these events more in stone? Game of Thrones changed a couple of things too, and that was fine, and hell, he even praised some of the changes. But I guess at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to, in regards to change, it's good when it's good and it's bad when it's bad. So. And finally, Where's Poochie says, "Considering the bad press and extremely negative leaks, it's much more tolerable than I expected. There are still many dumb elements and a fundamentally dramatically underdeveloped story to deal with, but I am still grateful to see this universe portrayed on screen." Again, great attitude to have about this. Though I'll admit that a lot of the negative attitudes from the show come from people who didn't like certain decisions made, like with Preston and I regarding Season 2's finale, or people who wanted to write the entire thing off because they didn't like a few episodes. And this comes back to what I said about nuance. The first 4 episodes were well regarded by the fandom. Even George discussed it on his blog post once upon a time, and he liked it. But because of how it ended, people decided to write it all off as bad. Again, Preston and I criticized the fuck out of that ending, but a good chunk of that season was pretty good. But of course, you know, lack of nuance from other people. It wasn't bad. It had some frustrating things, sure, but the problem comes down to everything is either a 10 or a 1 for some people, and there's no in between. And as for the negative leaks, yeah, honestly, it's impossible to enjoy anything blind nowadays. Honestly, I've seen some of those float around, and you can't really escape it, so shout out to those people making fake ones that are ridiculous, like the Biffo Big Storm ones. That one is insane. But to your comment about being grateful to see the universe portrayed on screen, I like that, and I wish more people had that type of reaction. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, leave your thoughts down below and let me know what you thought of the first 4 episodes and what you're hoping to see for the remaining half of the season. Make sure to like, comment, favorite, subscribe, all that jazz, you know the drill. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.